On the line with me is Miranda Novash. Thank you for joining us, Miranda.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Where do you work?
I teach at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. We have an academic English program there. And I also work as a research writer for a VR language app called Immerse.
And VR is the topic of the article you've just written for MET. And honestly, I don't think I've ever been so excited and inspired by an article. So just in a nutshell, what is VR and what are some of the opportunities for language teaching?
VR is virtual reality, and it's generally split into two sort of categories. There's low immersion, which you do on your desktop, on your computer. So you go to a website, a place like Second Life is a pretty well-known one, and you get in there and it's almost like a video game. You can go to cities, you can go to shops, you can go to restaurants, but the other characters that you see in there are real people. And you can teach language in there. And high immersion VR is the type where you wear a headset, you hold controllers, and the experience is extremely immersive. Everything you see and everything you hear is within that virtual world. The advantages for teaching English or any language are, first of all, that you can really interact with the environment. So when you bring your students into a restaurant, for example, you don't have every student imagining their own version of the restaurant. There's an actual real physical space that the students have to negotiate and communicate about.
It sounds amazing. It sounds like the way of the future. Are there any sort of less obvious advantages as well?
Some of the less obvious advantages of teaching in VR, one that's actually quite a few studies have been done on is that when you're in VR, you are represented by an avatar, so sort of a character. And a large number of students have reported that they're a lot less anxious. Very often students have sort of anxiety and fear about speaking their non-native language in front of peers or in front of their teacher, and that is significantly less in VR.
I can imagine that. Yeah, are there any pitfalls for the new teacher?
Yeah, I would say the main pitfall is just sort of the excitement of being in VR. It's actually really cool. When you take your students into a new environment, there's a lot of new things to see. The students can interact with stuff, their avatars can pick things up, and it can be really exciting for the students and they want to explore it. I usually recommend dealing with that by just planning a few extra minutes. If you're bringing your students into a virtual scene that they have not been in before, just assume that they're going to need a couple of minutes to look around before you're going to get their full attention. You can try and use that also as a learning exercise. So, if your students find something very, very interesting and they're picking it up and they're playing with it, you can give them the language for that item. Oh, that's very interesting. That's a pitcher. Can you pour that into the glass? So there's the distractibility factor, but that usually evens out after a couple of minutes.
Yeah, right. And you end the article with 5 teaching tips. Could you give us one as a taster?
I think the main one is to treat it like a story. So you have the opportunity to be with your students in a very realistic environment. So imagine that you've actually taken your students on a trip to this particular location. What would you have them do in real life? So think of the storyline that you're going to be having them do, have them act it out. The advantage of that is that they will get practice using really authentic language to perform a real task, just as though they were really in that location.
That sounds great. And just one final question. Have you got any thoughts on where VR in English language teaching will go from here?
I feel like VR has to be ultimately the future of language teaching, because it's a chance to bring authenticity and realism to your students so that they can, instead of just using their imaginations or paper materials, that they can have a very, very realistic experience and really practice the language in an authentic context. So I think VR is definitely going to be the future of language teaching.
Yeah, you've convinced me. Miranda, thank you so much for your time. And
Thank
we'll
you.
look forward to seeing more of your work and more about VR. Thank you.
Thank you very much.